All right, welcome everyone. I'm Tom Deneen, president of the Maryland Association of Scholars, which is one of the state affiliates of the National Association of Scholars. And today I'm honored to be here with Haley Gluhanich of FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Haley serves on three committees currently of the American Bar Association's Forum for Communications Law. So it seems that right out of law school, you're already becoming active in an organization I wish I'd become more active in myself out of law school. Um, since joining FIRE in 2022, Haley has passionately advocated for the free speech rights of all Americans, with a special focus on free speech on college campuses. And that's very much what we're going to be focusing on today. So we're very pleased to have her. Haley works tirelessly to ensure that students and faculty can exercise their rights to free expression, academic freedom, and due process. Those goals are very much aligned with those of National Association of Scholars and all of its state affiliates. So that's wonderful to have that complementarity. Haley believes that one of the best ways to advocate for something is to educate others on the topic and engage in discourse about uh, that topic. And today we'll be talking mostly about a very controversial topic, and that's the presence of anti-Semitism on American campuses and increasingly campuses everywhere, overseas as well, as international events proceed and expand as the way they have. Um, Today we'll be focusing mostly on a project undertaken by the Maryland Association of Scholars, and it focuses on anti-Semitism in light of free speech on Maryland college campuses and also, to some extent, secondary school campuses, grade school campuses. But we're looking at anti-Semitism in light of not just the existence of harassment of Jews and actions against those who have a Zionist position, but also the concept of free speech as we explore. Those people are taking positions that are often extreme, but some of the people are who are anti-Zionist are taking much more civil, rational, expository positions that aren't maybe generating the same level of press as the more dramatic protests have. But so the project will try to balance those two worlds, and I'm sure Haley will have some great insights into all this. In Maryland itself, Jewish students have faced a disproportionately high level of bias, which is mirroring a national trend showing that anti-Semitism does account for the most religion-based hate crime in the U.S., according to the FBI. So as we're exploring this, it's a volatile, emotional situation, but we're also exploring the other side of First Amendment concerns and making sure everyone is able to express their views if they're very anti-Zionist or whatever, without necessarily being banned from campuses or having events canceled. And it's a very sensitive set of issues, and we're thrilled to have Haley here with us. So maybe we can get into those questions. I'm joined with on this talk with Jonah Hornum, who's my colleague from the Maryland Association of Scholars. Jonah has done a great deal of work on this project, more than I have, although I've had plenty of input. But Jonah, maybe you'd like to start off by asking Haley some questions, and we'll get into this.
Sure, yeah. So to begin, could you briefly describe your role at FIRE and then FIRE's organizational mission?
Yeah, so basically, Fire's, big thing is to defend and protect free speech, free expression, academic freedom, and due process rights of all Americans. We help people all across the country and all the territories. We've even helped people all the way in Guam. Um, and we also like to educate the public as well, so people know what their rights are, what disciplinary actions governmental entities may take against you. We kind of feel the more people know what their rights are and what the law is, I mean, that's only going to be a benefit. There's really no negative to that. Um, and we do this through all different avenues. We do litigation, we work more in advocacy roles with college campuses, with other governmental agencies or entities. We review policies at college campuses to make sure that they are not restricting free speech. We also have our own legislative team, so they're dealing, with trying to get bills passed or not passed. And then we also have, our student outreach team and our comms team to try and, push things out to the public, get people engaged. My role specifically, I am a senior program counsel for our campus rights advocacy department. So I am working directly with college students, faculty, student groups, and student journalists who feel that their rights have been violated. Oftentimes, I'm seeing students who are being suspended or expelled, or maybe they're even being blocked by the university's Instagram account. We're seeing faculty members who are being investigated or put on leave, or they're being told you can't teach certain things or teach things a certain way. We're seeing student groups who are being denied recognition or their events are being canceled because of public outcry. And then we're seeing student journalists who are being told by their universities, you can't publish that, or you need to run all your stories by us first. And we try to help these individuals before having to resort to litigation. Litigation is expensive, it's time consuming, consumes a lot of energy as well. Most people don't want to litigate, especially when at the end of the day, it's not necessarily, money that you're going to be getting as just your rights vindicated. And so a lot of our efforts are through writing letters to these universities outlining this is the issue and this is how you can rectify it. We also maintain a lot of good contacts with different schools, general counsels, presidents, high up administrators. So sometimes we'll just talk with them directly. Um, if we're finding that a school just like really doesn't want to budge, we will do kind of like public pressure campaigns on social media. Maybe we'll do like some videos. And then we also are trying to do more what we call campus activations. So getting our staffers on the ground at a college or a university and just being there so we can explain to people what's happening. Maybe we can do some sort of creative activity with it. For example, we had a situation where students were getting in trouble for a poster that they had been posting. And so one of our activities to get people engaged was kind of like a create your own poster making table. And then while they were doing that, we were also handing out, pamphlets and information about what your rights were, talking with them, getting them to sign like these take action with petition like things. To get the university to do the right situation. So we really like to, get these students and faculties, we want them to make sure that, they're being able to express themselves. And to the extent that a university is trying to censor them or restrict their free speech rights, we're just really trying to get the school to change their mind before there is a potential of litigation or being docked in our college free speech rankings or things like that.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you, what, where are you seeing at this point most of the not violations, but most of the controversies arising? Is it because of more liberal attempts to quash right-wing views, or is it more conservative, or is it a complete mix? With the Israel thing, it seems generally conservatives side with Israel, and they are indifferent, or they're not as sympathetic as you might imagine to the critiques of Israel that a lot of Palestinian rights groups have. What do you sense any political tendencies there where there are more left wing or right wing problems, or is it a total mix?
I mean, overall, it's a total mix. Like I'm seeing everything, all sorts of political viewpoints from the right, from the left, from the I don't know where that falls on the spectrum. I think whenever there is some sort of big thing that's happening in the world or the country, sometimes that's the censoring can come from more of the left or more of the right, kind of depending on what the situation was. I think a really good kind of um, example that shows it comes from the both is back in like 2020, for example, during the protests after George Floyd was murdered, you had a lot of people on the right who were saying things along the lines of, he deserved it, he was a criminal, I'm glad he's gone. And then you had people on the left who were, taking these posts and trying to send them to their employers and say, get these people fired. And then 5 years later, when Charlie Kirk is assassinated, you have a lot of people on the left who are saying he deserved it, he was a racist, he was a horrible person. And then it was the people on the right who were taking those posts, sending it to their employers and trying to get them fired and censored. So it really depends on what's happening in the world. But there's always a cycle of like, okay, if it's conservative speech that's being censored the most right now, give it no time and it's going to be reversed and it's going to be the left speech sometime soon. Um, I know like right now, for example, in Texas, I don't even know if I would call it liberal speech that's being censored, but there is a lot of um, administrators that are having to review syllabi to make sure that they don't touch on race, sex, gender, things like that, even though there are some things like we had one individual, a professor who teaches philosophy and was told that he can't use his Plato readings because they just happen to touch on gender and race. And he's like, well, I'm not like advocating for certain things. It's like, this is Plato, like this is philosophy. So we're seeing like a lot of that just happening in Texas right now. But in terms of the rest of the country, it is
Yeah,
just kind of a full mix.
and it's such an odd position to take with Plato. And my college curriculum was very much great books, starting off with something. We might have read Plato's Republic as our first assignment, but Plato, because he's foundational to Western thinking, um, you want to regard in light of all of his brilliant insights. You don't want to take identitarian qualities and say, well, Plato might have been homosexual, or Plato might have been uh, Plato was from an upper class background, and he might have had slaves. All these personal qualities of Plato that, yeah, you might question, or have opinions about, but they're not relevant to the reason that we read Plato. And
Yeah.
that tendency to extract identity qualities, like was Tchaikovsky homosexual or was he not homosexual, or was Michelangelo? It's just not the point. And that can come from the right or left. And really briefly, because I know we want to get into the substance of this project that we're working on, but Jonah and I also serve on the Maryland Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. That's how we met. And I'm part of the conservative coalition on the committee. And Jonah, I won't describe what Jonah is. I mean, Jonah, he's not. You don't identify as conservative, right, Jonah?
Like more like independent, I would say. So a centrist.
Right. So we initially had the idea on the conservative side of doing anti-Semitism as a topic of research, and all the conservatives were in line with that. However, I knew that the more left-leaning members of the committee were not going to go for the entire, like the unadorned anti-Semitic thing. So I thought in discussing it that maybe free speech as a concern to complement the focus on anti-Semitic harassment on campus, that would be a way of bringing in left-wing concerns. However, that led me to be somewhat ostracized by the conservatives
Mm.
on this committee because conservatives don't do things like question the free speech rights when it's something like Israel, right? Jonah and I connected because Jonah, I'm not Jewish. Jonah is Jewish and has himself faced serious anti-Semitic harassment. So he and I connected on the topic of free speech, and that we're both free speech absolutists. And if you want to say something against Israel, that you should be able to say that peacefully without harassing people. Um, and I feel that way too. And it's been amazing to us to see how both sides can just jettison this idea of free speech and recognition of discourse when it comes to passionate issues like this. So that's how we got here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the two issues are very intertwined. Like I feel like they just naturally are. You're so yeah, I think this is a good way to kind of, try and get both viewpoints in there. I mean, I come at this at an angle of like there are laws and this is what you have to follow. This is what the Constitution says. And that, even in my own work in trying to protect and defend certain speech, literally on both sides, is you get people who just like don't care what the law is. And they're like, cool, but I don't care. And it's like,
That's
oh, okay.
that's really the scariest. That's the scariest issue, and it's the test cases. Kind of like, I mean, the extreme would be I forget the name of the lawyer who defended Nazis in Skokie. Was it Skokie, Illinois? I
Yep.
should know this. You probably
Okay, yeah.
right. Uh, where you have somebody who's willing to take a position that's to defend people who are uh, ideologically out to eradicate Jews, despite being Jewish. The free speech and free expression, the First Amendment, are so precious to him that he's willing to do that. And that's an extreme position, but I'm just amazed that more people don't see the value there. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much about this. Maybe Jonah, you want to
Yeah,
get
sure,
into
yeah.
some questions? Yeah, back to the topic.
First question is, does Maryland have any state level civil rights provisions that span institutional duties beyond Title VI in case of anti-Semitic harassment?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically about Maryland. I do know that generally many states do have they have their own laws. But when it comes to just pure speech expression, those state laws are limited by what the US Constitution allows. So, for example, when it comes to expression, if Maryland did have a state law, those laws are have limitations that are going to be the same limitations as federal law limitations. Um, so it's kind of just a very short answer is like if they can have laws, but those laws are limited by what federal law says and by what the US Constitution says in terms of what's protected speech and what's not protected speech.
Yeah,
And it would be things like, right, the Constitution has uh, very clear, well, not the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has laid out, all the forms of unprotected speech, things like discriminatory harassment, true threats, incitement, uh, the list goes on and on. So if a law is trying to punish speech that the Supreme Court has said is protected, then not
yeah,
probably not going to stand.
yeah. It makes sense.
And
Right.
that's that. Maybe you see this tension uh, between contexts where free speech is really kind of examined purely, where it's the person who goes into a public park and starts talking about something that's disliked by some observer, and the defense is, well, in this public place, in a public forum, you can say anything as long as you're not inciting violence. However, when you get into an employment situation or a school situation, you have another set of rules that, um, while still broadly respecting free speech, you can still impose restrictions on what someone says.
Yeah,
And
and that's going to be things like, you can't disrupt a class. So if you're a student and you just want to stand up and take 10 minutes of class time to share your views, even if somehow it's related to class, like what you're learning in class, probably going to be deemed disruptive. You can't do that. Schools can also have what we call time, place, manner restrictions. And these have to be viewpoint and content neutral. And these are going to be those things that you're seeing like no amplified sound after 10 p.m. Why? Because college students do need to sleep, or no staking things into the ground. We saw a lot of these time, place, manner restrictions being used correctly and incorrectly when the encampments were happening 2 years ago. That was a big topic. A lot of schools um, either were not applying them correctly or were coming up with new ones in the middle of the night and then not telling anyone that new policies were happening. Or in the alternative, you did have schools who had really good, well-written time, place, manner restriction policies and were applying them appropriately. One thing we always tell students who are interested in maybe doing a demonstration or, going out and doing something expressive is to just always look at your school's policies and make sure that you are abiding by those appropriate time, place, manner restrictions. And to any extent that you think that those policies might actually be restricting speech impermissibly, then like we will always look over those policies and make our own determination of like, okay, no, this is reasonable, or no, this is not reasonable. But a lot of people will say things along the lines of, well, in a school, we have one of our values is to be respectful and to contribute to a positive nature. And like, that's great to have. But at a public school, you are bound, I should clarify, public college or university, because K through 12, their rights, are a little bit different. But at a public institution of higher education, you are bound to follow the First Amendment. And the First Amendment clearly says, like, offensive speech is protected, hateful speech is protected. The Supreme Court has reiterated this so many times, like just over and over and over again. But a lot of schools don't like that, I guess,
Mm.
and they will try to punish speech purely because someone is like, I was offended by it, I found it hateful. And it's like, that sucks. Like, it really does. I really feel for you and how that feels. But like, the school also has this obligation to abide by the First Amendment, and they cannot punish speech that is just purely offensive. Of course, if it is coupled with one of those forms of unprotected speech, then yeah, it can be punished. But just claiming I was
I'm
offended,
uncomfortable.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I was hurt by it, I was intimidated by it, it made me feel scared.
Mm.
It's interesting.
Does that ever override? Are there ever cases where someone makes a case for a teacher or another student um, going too far in being frank about what he or she feels about a certain subject, like race or slavery or the existence of Israel, and the claim being that they'll just go on about how they think it's say unjust that the state of Israel was established. And a Jewish student says, "Listen, I feel threatened by that. I find that to be anti-Semitic and a personal attack. Yet it's not. It's protected speech and it's delivered politely. But do you see a tension between those kinds of statements and then students pointing out that that's a threatening statement to them?"
We've seen that a lot, right? And I understand that like these schools are put in such a tough position because it's like I want my students to feel safe, or sometimes I have this public pressure to, help these students, but then also there's this First Amendment obligation. And it really like comes down to the legal facts, which is just like feeling threatened. If there's no actual true threat, just feeling threatened is not enough to now make protected speech punishable. If it truly does arise to a true threat, and there is a strict definition of what a true threat is, and that is when someone seriously communicates an intent to commit an unlawful act of violence onto a person. Unless that definition is met, just feeling threatened is not enough. If the student feels hurt or unsafe by it, again, it would have to reach one of these definitions of,
Thresholds, yeah.
yeah. But we saw that definitely a lot where a lot of people were claiming, and honestly, from both sides as well, like there was a pro-Palestinian or a pro-Israel protest, and I was walking by it, and they were chanting things really loud. They were chanting like horrible statements and remarks. and I felt unsafe, I felt threatened. And as long, like obviously we would analyze, look at some, maybe some documentation, look at information. And if those protesters were, not violating any policies, they were not, using speech that was unprotected, then it kind of became one of those like I feel for you that you felt that way. I'm really sorry you felt that way, but like this is what the First Amendment protects, and that's kind of what the school has a duty to protect at that point. Um,
How's the I guess the tracking or the um, I guess establishing a record of anti-Semitic harassment or other forms of harassment that um, really disturbs students? Is this something colleges and universities are good at, or is it does it vary dramatically between universities, or how does that work?
I feel, in my experience, I feel like it's kind of been depending on the university. We've seen some universities have just always really bad responses to people making complaints. And then we've seen universities have really good responses, right? The bad would be, well, we're going to investigate and possibly punish people for protected speech. And then the good responses being like, hey, I understand that this is how you feel, and maybe we as a university don't necessarily um, agree with what's being said, but we do have a First Amendment right to or obligation to protect this. So that is what we have to do. Um, but if you need additional resources, here are some things that we can do to help you, right? I don't think this universities need to just kind of be like, oh, it's protected, leave me alone now. But like you can still, protect that speech and then offer the offended student resources to, help them. Maybe that's talking with someone, maybe it's helping them create an event to counter what they just experienced. The what we like to say the best remedy to speech you don't like is more speech. Um, and then we've seen some universities just not really have any idea of what they're supposed to do. And sometimes they'll actually come to us and be like, hey, can we have a conversation so you can tell us like what our constitutional constraints are in this situation? Because we just generally don't know, and we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So
Mhm.
kind of
And I
all
have,
over the place.
I'm looking through our list of questions, and I'll leave this largely to Jonah after this one, but there is one that touches on this. And to bring this back to Maryland, the University of Maryland um, attempted back in October 2024 to impose a temporary ban on expressive events, and I'm not sure if that's the term they used, but that's in our question. Jonah might be able to speak to that, but they banned temporarily expressive events, and a federal court responded by saying that um, it's unacceptable, and they blocked that ban. Do you run into these situations in across the country where there's a university, I guess, trying to avoid trouble and just
Yeah.
limiting events like this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember this case, and being tasked to look into this a little bit more. Um, I mean, I think the federal court got it right. Like you cannot just enact a blanket ban on expressive events. First of all, a lot of the institutions, because we've seen a few try to do this, maybe if it wasn't just all expressive activities, it was like controversial ex activity. But like, what are you considering an expressive event,
Right.
right? Because wearing clothing with words on it, expressive. Talking to your friend in the cafeteria, expressive. Your poetry club where you guys are writing poetry together, that's expressive. So first of all, what are you determining expressive?
Everything virtual expressive is is a huge umbrella term, but
Exactly.
everything humans do on some level is expressive if they're interacting or writing to another human, right?
Exactly. So that's one issue. But then even if the school was like clarified what they meant by expressive activities, you still a public school still just can't do that blanket ban on whatever their defined expressive activities is. I mean, students, student groups, faculty, like they have the right to put on expressive events, whether they're planned or they're spontaneous. Like you you just like can't take away someone's rights because you think that's going to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve. Like you're just creating more problems. I've seen this obviously in Maryland. I saw it um, something similar in a few other states, not this bad necessarily, but them trying to be like, yeah, okay, we're just gonna cancel all events that have to do with controversial speech, or we're canceling all speech that has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, maybe that's not a blanket ban on all expressive, but like you're still banning speech based on its content for no other reason than like you don't want to have to deal with like people complaining about certain speech or potentially having to hire more security and just like dealing with how much effort it is going to take to have these events. Like that's not good enough. You can't, you just, you
Right.
just can't ban
Once you
speech.
start deciding to ban forms of expression, it seems that if you're really searching for total convenience as an entity, as a school or as a country, you just start becoming more extreme and outright banning uh, books or political parties or other forms of escalation. Where if you don't like a given form of expression, the extreme result of that, the extreme backlash is, well, we'll just get rid of that whole series of books or that whole political party because we don't like them. That's the
Yeah.
kind of the outcome. Where
And
you,
like the whole, like, a value of higher education is being able to debate with people who maybe aren't like-minded, researching things, discovering more information, their truth, whatever, really that marketplace of ideas. And I think, you know, individuals at that collegiate level for almost always are above 18. Like they are adults
right,
and they should know how to have these conversations. They should be willing to have these conversations or to at least accept that other people are going to have these conversations. Um, I think when you get to sensitive topics like politics, religion, race, gender, things like that, yeah, the conversations are going to get heated. There's going to be some disharmony, and that's expected. And it's the solution shouldn't be, oh, we don't want to d deal with it or we don't want to have this disharmony, so we're just not going to allow it. It should be, okay, let me teach you guys what is and is not protected so you guys kind of know what your own boundaries are, but also how to have good conversations with people. Okay, if you get to a point where you do not like what they're saying, you are just floored by what they said and not in a good way. Like, if you don't want to continue the conversation, here's how you can leave. Or here's how you can engage with this person to either try and change their mind or poke holes in their argument or whatever it may be. Maybe if it's you're arguing with someone online, maybe yeah, you're not changing that person's mind, but now there's someone who's scrolling through, who's seeing the argument, who really was on the fence, and now you've changed their mind or you're making them think. I think especially with the emergence of technology over the past couple decades, like you're seeing people not necessarily know how to engage civilly like they used to be able to. Um, and so, people can hide behind this mask of a profile, be anonymous, things like that. Um, so I think just learning how to engage civilly would be, or teaching your students how to engage civilly is probably the better route to take. It's definitely a better route to take than just saying no expression.
right, and maybe starting off um, discourse if it's a group context that you're looking to set up, you could you could point out to everyone who's in a potential audience. Listen, we'll be discussing very frankly the existence of Israel and the role of Palestinians there and Palestinian and Israeli history. And if that's going to upset you, or if then maybe you're very welcome to come, but it's going to be a very open discussion. And here, if it starts to become very upsetting, then here are constructive ways of dealing with that. And kind of setting boundaries. Does that ever happen, where as a preliminary kind of thing?
If like the school is setting the boundaries, yes and no. Like we've seen that. I think a lot of it is inherent in like an announcement of an event, like, hey, this is what the title is and this is what we're going to be talking about. I think a lot of people can kind of
No,
figure
it's coming.
out what's going to be talked about. Um, we have seen schools where if there's been a lot of public outcry on an event, they will say like they'll put out a statement saying, hey, this isn't the speech of us, but like we, according to the First Amendment, these student groups have their rights to host these events.
It doesn't represent the university's official view or anything like that.
Yeah, and they'll even put things in there like if you are planning to like protest this, like just make sure you're doing it correctly, things like that. But we also would want schools to encourage students to attend events that made them feel a little uneasy or uncomfortable. I mean, I've seen debates where someone comes in and they're like, this is 100% my position. Like, I'm not changing. Like, this is what I believe. And then they talk to someone who knows how to engage civilly and they come out of it and they're like, ooh, I think my mind maybe isn't not necessarily changed, but I don't know if I'm 100% on my stance anymore. Like those were some good arguments.
And isn't that kind of one definition of education, or a very important part of education, is having your views
Yep.
not dictated to, not adopting views because they're what you grew up with or
Yep.
what your parents insisted on. It's because you've thought them through as an adult and you've
Yep.
had views changed. I mean, isn't that vital?
Yep. And I forget who even said this, where it originated from, but like the best way to become comfortable is to like put yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Mm,
Like you're
that's great.
only like you have to expose yourself to these sort of things. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
And if that exposure to discomfort makes us more secure, and because we've examined alternative positions, and maybe it'll help refine and solidify certain positions by being challenged, and that's just all part of
Yep.
constructive discourse. Jonah, can we get help get us back to the questions we wanted to start off with hypothetically,
So
but so interesting discussing this.
I just thought of something that happened in 2025. The UMD SGA had a vote that was going to condemn and prevent IDF soldiers or former IDF soldiers from speaking at university events or hosting events. Is that something that would, are you aware of that, or was that something Fire was made aware of?
It could have been. We get so many cases every day, and if it's not like the exact case that I was on, sometimes I forget about it. So we could have gotten it. We have definitely I've seen that a few times, like, hey, we're trying to ban either it's a specific person or we're trying to ban like a specific group of people. And one thing I always point out, because this is like a little misinformation that or misunderstanding, I guess, people have is that student governments at public universities, like they are now part of that university. Like they can't restrict people's free speech. They have to allow free speech, meaning like they can't just deny a group recognition because they don't like what the group stands for. They are essentially a branch now of this public institution and therefore a government entity. So generally, no, you can't just like ban a group of people because you don't like them or whatever, even if you claim that they're dangerous. There have been cases where student groups have tried to bring in like ex-terrorists and or maybe even like active terrorists or something like that, and the school had to allow them because just being like there's Supreme Court language out there that just being a member of a terrorist organization is actually protected. It only becomes unprotected if you start actually doing things to like help the group, but mere membership is protected. And so if you're banning someone from being a speaker at a student group's event just because of, they were part of a terrorist organization or you deem them as dangerous or a security threat, like
Yeah, I mean,
obviously there's always some things in there that can like as lawyers, it's like it depends, and like it depends on what the context is. But like generally, like no, you can't just ban a group
I,
of people.
it goes further than that in some ways with and I'm thinking of the Baader Meinhof terrorist organization in Germany in the 1970s, but and I'm not sure if this is the instance I'm thinking of, but it had to do with 1970s or late 60s terrorists who not only were welcome on campuses, but often would ascend to tenured positions on campuses. And um, having an identity as especially a left wing terrorist is far from being an exclusionary thing for a lot of places. You have a terrorist past that's 20 years ago, and you took a radical position, but now a lot of schools are going to be open to a lot of people with extreme views.
Yeah.
I guess this is a bit off topic, but the terrorism thing makes me think of the new bill that I sent you that I think it's called HB 1184 that three state House reps in Maryland proposed that essentially bans nonprofits from supporting Israeli settlements, which are considered maybe terrorism under like international law, for example. Is that something that is protected by the First Amendment, or are they actually violating the First Amendment by doing that?
I will say I don't know. I had a super busy day today, so I was not really able to like look at that bill. So I don't want to give you like any answer and then I like read it later and I'm like, "Oh, wait, I was totally wrong." So I just like I don't know if I can give an answer because I don't want to give you a wrong answer.
Yeah, that's completely fine. So I'm looking at the list of questions. In Maryland, what legal standard governs when students' speech in a public school or university may be disciplined as harassment rather than protected expression?
Yes. So there is a Supreme Court case. It's called Davis v. Monroe County. Um, and so what we like to say is the Davis standard. And the Davis standard lays out a very clear definition of what it takes for speech to become unprotected discriminatory harassment. And basically that standard, like the conduct, including speech, it needs to be targeted, unwelcome, on a protected class, and then it needs to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that essentially the victim or victims are unable to um, access their institution's opportunities and benefits. And this Davis standard is something we analyze a lot. I write a lot of letters about this. There are a lot of people, students, faculty members, who are being charged with harassment. You said this to a student, you said this about a student, you posted this online, it's harassment. And a lot of the time, I have to write to the school saying, this does not meet the Davis standard. And essentially, so long as it doesn't fall into any of the other, unprotected categories, if it does not meet this David standard, then it's protected expression. So obviously targeted, like pretty clear, needs to be about someone or to someone, unwelcomed. Most people who are filing a complaint of harassment, it unwelcome. So yeah. Um, Protected status. Sometimes we see individuals getting in trouble for harassment, even knowing what they said had nothing to do with anything in regards to a protected class. Like it could, I mean, this is not what I've seen, but like how I explain it to people like K through 12 is like if you said something like, I really don't like all redheads, like, okay, but like your hair color is not a protected class. Like what people are saying about you being redheaded might really hurt your feelings, but not a protected class can't be harassment. And then that severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive element, we see a lot of schools in particular, they'll have that language, but slightly different. They'll say severe or pervasive. It really needs to be and. So, a one-off Instagram post, probably about, a religion or a race, that one-off Instagram account post, probably not going to be pervasive enough. The severity also, I've seen things that have been this is pretty severe, but then it doesn't meet the other elements. Or sometimes I see things and I'm like, okay, this is not severe. And if your question is like, what is severe, what is not, it's one of those like you kind of know it when you see it kind of situations. But like I said, even when speech, we look at it and we're like, okay, yeah, this is, even if someone is making the argument, well, that's really severe, it usually doesn't reach that pervasive standard, or for example, that objectively offensive standard. It might be subjectively offensive, but especially when people are saying things regarding like anything political, there's going to be a large section of, American people that probably agree with you. And if you have that many people agreeing with you, there's a good divide. It can't really be objectively offensive. So
Yeah.
it's going to be more of that subjective. And then that last part that I mentioned, where the victims basically are being denied their opportunities of the university. They're that one's kind of hard. Like, these are things like you're not attending class anymore. Like you have to transfer schools, but just being like, I didn't like it.
Right.
Not enough. If you're still attending classes and you're still playing on the sports team and going to all your extracurriculars and you're still like
Yeah.
you're receiving the benefits. So we like to use the Davis standard for public institutions of higher ed. And if it doesn't meet that standard,
What if somebody what if that standard is met by a student is seen as being pervasively harassing of other students? Um, what do schools do, or is it a
yeah.
totally mixed bag? Because is there bias training? Is there an attempt to re-educate, or is it strictly disciplinary kind of giving
Yeah.
people punishments, or how does that work?
I think we would really leave that up to the college or the university. Um, right? Like if it's not, if it really truly does meet that Davis definition and it becomes unprotected speech, it can be punished, whether that is, someone is being suspended or put on leave, or maybe it's just like, okay, somehow you're not going to get suspended, but we're going to make you do like a training or something. The training now, of course, cannot make the student or the individual affirm that they believe certain things, but it can just maybe be a training on something where they don't have to affirm a viewpoint. Um, I would I would say if you are being found guilty of speech because it truly arises to this strict definition of discriminatory harassment, it's probably something that is proportional to a suspension. Again, I can't say for sure, but I mean, one thing that we always will say is like, even if someone can be disciplined, their punishment should be proportional. Um, but it's really up to school how they want to, met out that discipline. But again, only if that definition is met.
Does
Right.
this definition apply to public schools as well? Because I know that you said that free speech was like protected mostly for 18 plus, but since public schools encompass under 18 and minors, and our project also encompasses public schools like high schools, for example. I know that Howard County Public Schools has a lot of like controversial actions against Palestinian advocacy. So what would happen there?
Yeah. I mean, the Davis standard is definitely what should get applied for, college, universities. When it comes to K through 12, K through 12 is really tricky because their minors just have, like, they still have free speech rights, but they're a little less because of their age and things like that. Um, and I don't really deal with K through 12. I do, I believe that the Davis standard it came about through a like K through 12 case. So, I would think that Davis would still apply K through 12. Um, I can't say 100% for sure because the courts always do this thing where they're like, okay, well, now we're analyzing this standard, but in regards to K through 12, and sometimes the justices like throw in some, things of like, well, they're younger, so X, Y, and Z, whatever. Um, but like if you're looking at it just as like an individual, I would view it as, well, this is what the Supreme Court says. They haven't said anything yet about it not being applied to minors. So let's just move forward as if this does rather than not, and then have, right, the worst that's going to happen is you get told actually it does apply, and now you know that moving forward. But because that wasn't like a set precedent, like you're not going to get in trouble for not knowing that it shouldn't have applied to you, if that makes sense. Like you were not aware that you you know that I need to have a different standard for K through 12. You'd only get in trouble for misapplying is if you knew that there was a different standard.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the third question is, are Maryland public institutions legally permitted to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism for internal policy use?
I think at baseline, my answer would be no. And that's because that definition in and of itself, it's too vague and it is very overbroad. I mean, just looking at one of the lines from that definition, it says, like the definition basically targets a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. This sort of description, the way it's written, it's so broad that it would allow a university or college to investigate and even punish core political speech. Maybe if someone was just being critical of Israeli policies, that essentially maybe that's not what they meant for it to be fall under, but like it gives the university to investigate and punish that sort of speech. The way the definition is written, not only is it overbroad in the sense of like, okay, but a lot of these things that it's saying you can't do, you actually, according to the First Amendment, can. But it's also very vague in that a reasonable person reading this is not going to leave wherever they are reading it and go, okay, I know what I am and am not allowed to say. People are going to lean towards self-censoring rather than trying to, test the waters. And, the definition's primary author, Ken Stern, he even came out and was like, yeah, I oppose that Anti-Semitism Awareness Act because of the likelihood that this definition will be used to chill student speech. What we would argue here at FIRE is that you should rather use that Davis standard of harassment. That's going to be your best bet in making sure that you're complying with your First Amendment obligations.
And that the sense of vagueness or verbal ambiguity feeds into, to me, as a Gentile who's never had the same, I guess, the active involvement in Israel or family considerations that I would have if I were Jewish, like Jonah. The question of how much activity surrounding protests against Israel and Zionism and the Israeli military policy, how much of that can be undertaken without without flowing into or segueing into anti-Semitism, in the sense of, well, you're not really saying that because of hating Israel or questioning Israeli policy. You're saying that because you don't like Jews, and you're saying that about me because I happen to be Jewish. When if you extract yourself from all that and say, well, look at there are plenty of anti-Zionist Jews or Jews who are very active in questioning, say, the policies of Netanyahu. No one would say, well, listen, you're being anti-Semitic by questioning Netanyahu because that person is Jewish, or the identity of the person must be distinguishable from the political positions that person's taking. So how can you ipso facto say, well, anybody who criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic and hates Jews personally? That seems to be the real crux issue in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, I think, whenever there's definitions like this, people kind of create their own, like, this is what it means, this is how it's going to be applied. And I mean, the real scary thing about the definition is simply that just like maybe this is not how it's actually being used or how it has been used, but it offers the possibility for it to be used this certain way. It's like, okay, you're just going to be critical of what Netanyahu said, what he posted on Twitter or something, and you just said a tweet like, I hate what he said. Like, I'm now going to use this definition to try and, get you investigated and punished. Um, and it kind of also goes into this concept of like where people don't realize that offensive and even just hateful, just purely hateful speech, it is protected. If someone went out and posted on social media, I hate this whole group of people. I wish that they all would die and none of them ever existed again. I really, really hate them. Like, horrible. I think most people would probably agree, yeah, that's like really bad. But like that itself, not a threat. Like, yeah, you said I wish that they would all die, but you're not
Taking
threatening
action
them.
to
That's,
fill
yeah,
that. That's the
right.
critical legal distinction. Is there's a big difference between saying I hate all X people and that
Yes.
leaving it at that, and then saying I hate all X people, and let's go down to this place where all of them are and do something about it.
Exactly. There's that specifics. And I think people also get really caught up because like even just um, you know, advocating for violence generally is also protected. So if you were like, I wish that America would kill all insert
Right.
group of people,
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
still protected. Just because you're talking about killing, like that doesn't mean it has to have those specifics of like, I know a group of them congregate in this area on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. So like, I know I have a gun in my basement, so let's all go take care of that. That's
Giving teeth or giving
that's a little bit
practical
different.
realization, the potential for realizing it. Yeah.
Yeah, but when it's just, yeah, things that are just really, really awful, like it might scream hatred, but it's still protected. And a lot of people will say to me, like, okay, cool, that's the law, but like I don't like it. And it's like, okay, well, I never said you had to like it, first of all. But also like in a way, it is kind of important. Like, it is important that we protect this speech because you want to know who the hateful people are. Like,
Yes.
maybe you're gonna have the people out there and be like, I don't want to know because it hurts my feelings. But no, if there's someone out there who hates my type of people, or even if they just have a viewpoint that's just really contradictory to my values, I want to know. I want to know who to avoid. I want to know who not to invite to my parties anymore. I want to know, like, just who I should be prepared to encounter when I bring up my speech. Like, you want to know who the next awful person is
Right.
so that we can either try and change their minds now, try and get someone else's platform to overshadow them, or to just shame them.
Yeah. As opposed to knowing that everyone is acting under some limited sense of expression where,
Yep.
look, and Jonah, I think, can probably speak to this, where, look, you, you know that there are people who can't stand you, but you also realize that they're not, given the context, able to express that. So you have no idea what might come next because if I had some warning signs, if I knew what people really thought and could take action against it, that's a stronger position tactically, I guess, than not knowing what the hell is going on and then having something come down on you in some Orwellian, uninformed fashion.
Yeah, there's also this like an argument to be made that, and I've kind of seen this as well, is where there are students who say really horrible things, and then the school is, trying to punish them, or maybe somehow they're getting censored. It's almost you're adding fuel to their fire. They're now like, well, I'm being censored. There's a reason why I'm being censored. They don't want to hear this viewpoint. They don't want to hear the truth. And then it just amps them up more. You divert them to a platform where now people tend to agree with them and, hyping them up.
Right? Echo chamber.
You're
Yeah.
not by investigating speech, punishing speech, censoring speech, you're not getting rid of the opinion. You're just
Letting
hyping
it fester,
from your
driving it
own
to a
eyes.
place where it
Yeah.
may become even more perverse. Jonah, do you have personal
Yeah,
experience? Do you have any?
that's why my like where my free speech absolutist stance came from. That like if like neo Nazis are forced to hide their views, then they're just gonna gather into an echo chamber and then like probably like turn to violence because like they're gonna get so mad that they can't express that point of view. So yeah,
Exactly.
that's why censorship is bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like, and it's just a lot of people have a hard time conceptualizing this, and they're just like, well, I don't like it, so get rid of it. And it's like, no, but you don't understand. Like, you want to know. Also, give it a few years, and everything in the country is going to be switched, and it's going to be your speech getting, attacked. So you might as well take a principled stance now to protect your speech in the future.
Mm.
Yeah. So the fourth question we have is, does Maryland law permit public schools to track anti-Semitic incidents as a distinct bias category?
Yeah, so again, I don't know specifically about Maryland law, but just in a general sense, if a state was doing this, or, a public university or college, I don't necessarily see like a legal issue with it. I would see some like potential hazards that it could cause. The biggest one is that by creating such a database, you're effectively creating this like government database of who is, Jewish and who is not Jewish, or if the database was for anything else, like, and you don't want the government having that sort of information. You don't know what they're ever going to do with it. People also like their privacy. Um, and then like like I said, I wouldn't necessarily see a legal issue with it unless somehow this information in the database was being used to like like if they were doing, okay, everyone who gets put into this database, we're now going to investigate and punish, just because it's being considered bias. Because of course, like just on its face, bias is not a unprotected form of speech. Uh, like what we tell a lot of schools is there are a lot of schools who like to have kind of reporting systems, and they can be used poorly and they can be used appropriately. And what we always tell schools, and I think this can kind of relate to, I'm getting information into a database, so like what do I do with it is you can take if you get a complaint sent to you, you can take a cursory review of what the contents of the complaint. And if you can look at it and on its face, you are like, yeah, that is protected speech. Okay, you close the matter. Maybe you add it to your non-public database or whatever it may be, and then you move on. You never contact the person who's being complained about, etc. And then you can still like offer, your resources to the person who made the complaint. Of course, there are, my gosh, the lights. Um, there are always situations where maybe you're like, ooh, she's saying these are the facts and he's saying these are the facts. And if it's true this way, then protected speech. And if it's true this way, then it's unprotected speech. We need to investigate to even figure out what the true speech, like what speech was actually said. Okay, you can investigate that because depending on how the facts turn out, is going to determine if it's protected or not. So I think in terms of like the database, like if they are now just saying, okay, someone is put into this database, so now we're automatically investigating, even if we clearly know it's protected speech, I didn't have an issue with that. But if you're just having the database, just know that it's now a government database, so just be careful about that. I don't really know about any like privacy or like data collection, like how that would play out in terms of like the law. Um, but if we're just talking about it, the database, I
I guess
don't.
isn't that an incredibly paradoxical thing about uh, the establishment of databases of people who whom you're initially tasked with helping? And I think in terms of say groups of the disabled, which I was part of, or veterans groups at work, where the group is organized to help promote the interests of veterans or the disabled, and then you start discussing how to help people and taking names of people, and then you encounter resistance, privacy concerns about not wanting to be included on a list of veterans or the disabled because I might be discriminated against based on being disabled, and I have an invisible disability, like something that's more emotional or mental rather than a physical disability. And there's that tension where you don't want to necessarily go there. And I think of Jewish students who may not want to be identified as Jewish because they feel they might be attacked based on that, and yet they want to report things and become part of some process that can be used to defend themselves, and there's a strange tension there.
Yeah. It's Yeah, nothing legally wrong about these things that I've seen, but like I would never advise someone to create something like that. I'd probably be like, let's just think about the negatives here.
Mm.
Makes sense. So the next question is, based on Maryland precedent, when may a public university restrict or cancel a protest or a student event due to safety concerns
So
without?
again, yeah, so again, this is one where it's like the Supreme Court has made a lot of rulings on this, so they're kind of, the supreme law of the land. Um, and this is something I've seen a lot where there are protests and events, and schools will say something like, there's a public safety reason we need to cancel this. There have been threats. We have security concerns. And what we always say is like, okay, great, but what are they? Like, you can't just like, usually what we find out what's happening is it's pretextual. A controversial speaker is announced, or there's a known planned protests, and then people there's public outcry. We don't like this speaker, or um, we don't support this protest. And then the school is like, oh, there's a lot of pressure for us to maybe cancel this or postpone it or not allow it or whatever it may be. And they kind of give into those things. Um, what we always say is that if you are faced with a public safety or security concern, the school must take bona fide efforts to protect that speaker, um, and allow the event to happen, whether that's, an outside speaker invited by a student group or a protest. So maybe this means that the school has to hire more police officers for the event, or maybe it means uh, purchasing something else for safety reasons. Like you really need to try everything you can to still allow this event to happen. If the public safety concerns are so serious that truly the only option is to like cancel an event or a protest, then the school really should be reporting those like threats and concerns to law enforcement so that the law enforcement can, take whatever appropriate action. And then the school should also disclose to their campus community what the threats were and what they did to address them. Without doing that, it's going to just look like people complained and you gave in to a heckler's veto, and now you're letting people who are opposed to speech dictate what can and cannot happen. Um, there's also always those like technical reasons of like, hey, student group, you invited this speaker, and you're hosting it in our ballroom, but you never like even asked us if you could host it in our ballroom. Like we actually have this student like career fair happening. So like we're canceling your event because you didn't follow the correct process. Trust me, we've seen a lot of student groups not follow processes correctly. But then also, oftentimes, what we'll also see schools do is say, "Oh, you didn't follow. You have a protest. You didn't register this 10 days in advance." And it's like, well, sometimes things happen in the world overnight, and you don't even know that you're going to be protesting the next day because you didn't think that we were going to, our government was going to do XYZ or whatever it may be. So sometimes it's like, yeah, technically they didn't follow the policy, but we'll write in and be like, your policy is not constitutional. Um, but what we see the most is these unspecified safety and security concerns. And looking at the context, they're almost always coming right after people are taking to social media, being like, hey, school, cancel this event. So,
That made sense. So the next question is, under Maryland law, what procedural safeguards must student conduct officers follow when adjudicating speech-related disciplinary cases?
yes. So a lot of states have kind of their own laws on this. I don't know Maryland specifically. Um, and when states do kind of have laws on this, they are uh, more protective than like they're giving people more rights than less. But what we like to see is that students are getting due process. And if you're at a public school, you absolutely should be getting this due process. And at a basic level, and like I said, of course, these state laws can always provide for more. But at baseline, you should be getting a written, like if you're getting in trouble, you're getting investigated, something like that, the student should always be receiving written notice specifying what they did, not just, hey, we have some concerns about your speech or your inappropriate behavior. We see that all the time. It's so annoying. It's like, okay, but like, what are you accused? Like, they might not even know. We have people all the time who are like, I don't know what I said. Like, and that's just a whole process to even figure it out. Also, that's the only way that they're going to be prepared for the meeting is if they know what it's about. You can't just blindside them, be like, okay, you said this, and then they're like, what? Um, you need to offer students a hearing. So maybe if you do have, your pre-investigation meeting, and then there's a hearing later, you have to provide them with that hearing. And at that hearing, they need to be able to have witnesses. They can present evidence. They have the right to know who made the complaint against them, things like that. And then students should always have the right to appeal how a decision is. And there are some more, and they should have a neutral decision maker as well. There may be one or two other elements in due process, but those are like the big ones that we tend to see schools trying to like skirt around. And then, like
They
I
try
said,
to skirt. It's all very quasi-judicial as you're describing. What do they try to? What do they try to circumvent?
I mean, the biggest one is what I previously mentioned, where they won't specify what the student is in trouble for. They'll just say, like, we had some reports about your behavior, or just we have some reports against you, like you need to come in. And like I've literally
About
seen students,
Orwellian.
yeah, they'll say, can you please tell me what it is? And then the
People
school
have said
literally say,
something
like,
about you.
no. Another one that we kind of see how schools go around this is we saw this a lot with faculty members who get put on leave, is they'll be put on leave pending an investigation, or student groups will be placed on interim suspension pending an investigation. And it's like, but that suspension, that leave, that is disciplinary in action, like that is discipline. And you cannot discipline someone until they get, their hearing. And granted, this is just in the meantime, it doesn't matter. They have a right to share their side of the story before punishment is meted out. And
If
the interim is not a loophole.
Yeah, and maybe you can speak to one distinction where you have someone who's suspected of violent activity, and I think of Harvey Weinstein or a sexual predator, where there's pretty good evidence that the person is following through, and actually there is substance to this physical abuse, and he is disciplined or he's kicked out or he's prosecuted without all the evidence being in place. And do those situations where somebody is acting violently, in this case against Jews, where there's pretty good evidence, is that different from when somebody is just saying things, or where there's
I would argue yes. If there is someone who's presenting a real threat, a real security risk, something like that to individuals or to the campus, then yes. But there has to be, you know,
pretty good evidence or some substance?
some semblance of like, hey, it was reported that like you told a bunch of friends while you were drunk that you planned on bringing a gun to the school and whatever. So until we can figure this out, don't come to the school.
And that happens. You see that stuff
I've
like
seen that. And that's okay. But what I see a lot of is you posted something offensive on Facebook, you're internally suspended. And it's like,
that's scary.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Or you liked something. That's yeah, at even a more extreme
We've
point.
seen that too. Yeah.
And that happened to me at work, where I thought something someone posted was funny, and I hit like, and somehow a colleague who I didn't even know was on Facebook found that I had liked something and explained why it was offensive. And I thought, that's fine. I'll remove my like, but I find this Orwellian that
Yeah.
somebody takes something so remote and seemingly minor as some
Yep.
form of harassment. So
We saw in the wake of Kirk's assassination, there were people getting disciplined for liking other people's posts. And it's like, that's not even okay. Okay.
Gary, I want to be respectful of your time, Haley. We've gone a little more than an hour, and I know we
Oh,
haven't
so fun.
gotten through our questions. We can, if, I guess, maybe ask a couple more, and then possibly send a couple to you. Maybe you could respond in writing, possibly. But all the content here has been tremendously interesting and valuable to us.
Yeah, I'm happy to go as long as you guys need me to. So whatever works best for y'all.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonah, if you want to
Okay.
continue.
Yeah, the next question is, can Maryland school districts be liable under Title VI to deliberate indifference to anti-Semitic harassment even when the underlying speech is protected?
Okay. So if it's if the speech itself just, yep, alone, there's just this speech and it is protected, no, they're not going to be liable. But if the speech is coupled with, a category of unprotected speech, then yes, because I mean, it kind of goes down to some of the things I've said before, which is if it's protected by the First Amendment, then you have to protect it. You can't discipline it. And if your legal obligation is to protect it, you're not going to be liable for following the law. So
Okay.
very simple answer there.
The next question is, are Maryland institutions permitted to impose mandatory bias education or training requirements following speech-related incidents? I know that you touched on this before.
Yeah, and my answer is kind of what I said before, which is it really depends on the nature of the training. Now, if that training at the end is like you need to click this button saying that you accept that you will never say this type of offensive stuff again, we don't like that. We don't like to see click this to show that you affirm that these are the definitions that we decided of what bias is. Like you can't do that. You can't force someone to affirm certain viewpoints. Now what we have seen, and we get people, up in arms about this, is they're like, I had to take, for example, the alcohol training, like, and I had to affirm that I'm not going to drink underage. And it's like, oh yeah, they're asking you to like comply with the law. That's okay. That's not a viewpoint. But if the training was like, I want you to affirm that alcohol is the worst thing you could do to your body and that you will avoid talking about alcohol or something like that, like you can't do that. So if you, for like a bias training, if it was like, this is our definition of bias, what bias is, do you affirm that that's true? We don't like that. But if it's just like, hey, here's our definition of bias, but also here is what is and is not protected by the First Amendment, can you affirm that you just watched the video? Then that's probably going to be okay. But we have seen those trainings that force students and professors as well to affirm certain viewpoints.
And this has direct relevance to the big conservative concern over the last 5 to 10 years are statements that faculty will have to sign in the course of being hired to affirm their adherence to DEI initiatives or
Yeah, we've written a lot of letters to universities about that. We've seen that so many times where on like the page of, here's our hiring page and here's what we're hiring for. You click onto the job and it's like uh to be in this position, you need to support diversity and DEI, or we also see it with tenure, performance evaluations, promotions, things like that. Sometimes there'll be like these rubrics of like, and we have a lot of issues with that, especially when it's like, well, what are you considering to
yeah,
be
it's
diversity?
vagueness, right? Diversity, what they really mean is you adhere that to the concept of identity being an important thing.
Yes.
Like we want to avoid having too many of these people, especially
Exactly.
like
I wish I could remember what school it was, but they actually had these like part of their rubric was, conforms to our values of like DEI and stuff. But the way that they defined what each one was, we were like, wait, this is actually really good. So like part of their diversity, they specifically included like diversity of politics, including like far right, far left, like,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, like we like this was like really well written, but you get a lot of these schools who are like, you must conf and sometimes they're not even just like DEI, but some other wording that's used needs to support. I wish I could like think of something right now, but whatever it may be.
A common term is traditionally underrepresented groups that would
Yeah.
racial or ethnic or gender
Yeah,
concerns.
there's a lot of things, and it's just we've written these letters of like, you can't,
Right.
this is vague, this is overbroad, this is potentially compelling speech. Like we don't
And
like this.
it exposes the weakness of the misuse of words like diversity, because diversity can literally mean, um, uh, as you alluded to, viewpoint diversity, where if you don't have conservatives, and if 70 million people or whatever voted for Donald Trump, and you're saying that we don't want to have anything to do with that in academia because that upsets us, well, you're not embracing a kind of a general sense of taking a huge number of people into account based on the need for diversity.
Exactly.
But that's often not how it's used in practice, which is
Yep.
gender, race, and age recognition, and all these things that are identitarian qualities rather than intellectual or ideological qualities. And it shows the weakness of just taking a word and saying, "Well, we'll use this as a term of art to try to really mean something else," which is we want to avoid having too many straight white people or whatever the goal is.
Yep. It's
Sorry, go
really
ahead.
annoying
Yeah.
to see sometimes. And it's just like, especially when like the schools are just like, they just don't. Sometimes it's just truly they don't know better too. Like I always go into things giving a little bit of grace. I see a lot of times at like community colleges, for example. Sometimes it's just, this worker and, the whatever student success office, sending out a letter of investigation to a student. And
Mhm.
sometimes I have to remind myself, like, not everyone knows what the
Right.
First Amendment is. And like right, they're at a small community college. They might not have been trained on this or anything. And sometimes we write in and they're like, thank you for letting me know. I had no idea. And it's like, okay, sometimes these people are just truly don't understand. And then there's always the schools that are like, no, we're right, you're wrong. And it's like, okay.
And I'm sure a lot of schools are happy not to have people understand and not to be more actively questioning of
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't really pass some smell test. But
Yeah, and when we get a lot of these schools where it's like, hey, I just didn't know, or we have a lot of resources that administrators can kind of like our training. And we have like our own First Amendment trainer for administrators, faculty, students, all sorts of things. So sometimes we ask when we write to schools is like, hey, I'm so happy that, you rescinded this person's suspension, but like, do you also think that you can implement some sort of First Amendment training, maybe with your staff or even as part of your first year orientation or things like that? And a lot of schools will take us up on that because like they're like, oh, someone already has the material and we just have to like hit start slideshow, let's go. And like we'll also do the presentation a lot of times for these schools as well. So it's like you don't even have to do anything. Like we'll also literally come and do it. So
I was going to ask that at the end, but maybe tell us a bit more about what resources fire does have there. Like what else? They'll have someone come in and talk about the First Amendment. What else can they do?
really whatever you want within, some with some boundaries. Like if you want a training on this is what your rights are and this is what is not protected, we can do that. We can do a training geared more towards administrators of like this is how you should be investigating and making sure you're following due process. If you're just a student group who's very interested in free speech and you want someone to just sit and not even give a speech but just do a Q&A, like we can do that. If you are, it's that time where you are relooking at all of your policies to make sure you guys like the school's still liking those policies and you're like, huh, I read a lot about free speech lately. That seems to be in the news and I want to make sure our school's policies are conforming to our First Amendment obligations. Who will even do that? We will, and we'll do it for free. Everything we do, we'll do for free. Um, so it's like whatever you need, like we will try our hardest to find someone who can help you with that. Because like if someone's willing to change something so that they're in compliance with the First Amendment or that they're trying to do something to better support free speech, like that's what we want. So we will do um, whatever we can. Sometimes it's also just um, when schools tend to be at the bottom of we have like yearly free speech rankings.
Oh yeah.
Schools are not happy when they're at the bottom, especially
Like
the
U.S.
bottom
News and
five.
World Report, it used to be purely
Yeah.
academic levels. They didn't want to be on the bottom of that list, but now that FIRE's lists are getting recognition, that's another.
Yeah. And so a lot of these schools at the bottom will just be like, hey, literally, we just want to have a conversation with you guys and just talk through things about how we can like not be in the bottom five next year. And sometimes it's just having continual conversations with administration. We also do a lot of work with non like schools. We work with AAUP chapters. We work with other civil liberty organizations. We try to do partnerships. Um, just anyone that is interested in free speech and wants to hear from us, like we'll do it in whatever kind of like platform and in whatever kind of structure that is best suited for like what your needs are in that moment. Like I said, a Q&A, a panel, I'm lecturing, we're just going to have a conversation. We can do something very public. We can do something very private, whatever you want.
Terrific. That's great. We can go on if Jonah, if you want to continue, and Haley, you're willing. I have to take a break to deal with something, but because I started the meeting and I'm recording it, I can pause myself. But
I actually think the rest of the questions have already been like covered in some way. So
okay, so we're
I think
pretty
we
good
can,
on our
yeah.
side. All right, that's good. Haley, did you have? You've been. We were expecting a lot, and I think you gave more, even more than expected. Not just answering these questions that are Maryland specific and very relevant to our project, but just very very flexible ability to deal with all of my out of left field questions. And we really appreciate your being here.
Yeah, of course. Sometimes those like left field questions are like the best, just getting into conversations and being able to just go off of each other. I've been in positions where it's just sometimes like, here's the question, and then I answer, and then it's like, okay,
Yeah,
next. And so I like having these sort of conversations.
excellent. Well, good. Well, we are hugely grateful. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, Haley Gluhanich and Fire from Fire, and we hope to have you back again. We'll be talking to other experts, but you've been a tremendous first interviewee. And Jonah, you have anything to add about that?
I do not thank you so much for speaking with us. I think this was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for wanting to talk with me. And I'll just end on if you need anything, whether that's in the short term, like a week from now, a month from now, or long term, a year from now, or multiple years from now, feel free to like email me if you have any questions ever. You guys have my email. I'm pretty always online. So if you ever
Yeah,
need
same
anything,
here.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. We'll probably be in touch. I imagine I'm sure I'll have some follow-up questions, but you've been tremendous, and we thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.